The Battle of the Alamo was fought in 1836 during the Texas Revolution. In the early 1820s, to populate the north of their country, the Mexican government allowed Americans to move into Texas. With cheap land and tariff exemptions, Americans in Texas quickly outnumbered Mexicans. By 1830, Mexico outlawed further immigration from the United States and introduced new taxes, angering the Texans. In 1833, General Santa Anna was elected as Mexican president, and a petition was sent to him with a series of Texan requests. Some were granted, but the appeal of separate statehood for Texas was rejected. After taking power, Santa Anna brought in laws making himself dictator. To enforce tax laws and keep authority, 500 Mexican soldiers were sent to Texas, but they soon clashed with Texan settlers. After a string of defeats and besieged in San Antonio, the Mexican forces surrendered. Determined to crush the rebellion and regain control of Texas, Santa Anna led an army across the Rio Grande and targeted a former Mexican garrison, now occupied by Texans, known as the Alamo. On the day of the battle, the Texans, commanded by Colonel Travis, had 189 men. The Mexicans, led by General Santa Anna, had around 4,000. The battle took place over 13 days and began on the 23rd of February, when over 1,500 Mexican soldiers appeared and took position around the Alamo. They also deployed artillery to target the Alamo walls, although the cannon were placed too far away to cause serious damage. Upon the arrival of further Mexican soldiers, Colonel Travis saw he was greatly outnumbered and sent requests for reinforcements. On the third day of the siege, about 300 Mexicans entered a small village close to the Alamo in order to place artillery at a closer range. Texan soldiers at the southern and western walls of the fort began firing on them. The Mexicans took cover in the village, and a short battle between the two sides began. After suffering losses, the Mexicans retreated. Texan soldiers burnt the village to prevent it being used again. Artillery was persistently fired at the Alamo, but no casualties were suffered by the Texans. On the 8th day, 32 men arrived as reinforcements. The Texans now had a force of just under 200 soldiers. On day 10, the Mexicans also received reinforcements of 1,000 men. Santa Anna's force now numbered over 4,000. The Mexicans moved artillery close to the north wall and began a sustained attack against that position. For the next 2 days, the bombardment against the fort was intensified, but on the afternoon of day 12, the cannon ceased firing, and that night, positions were taken to storm the fort. Santa Anna ordered 4 columns to simultaneously attack the Alamo. 400 men at the north wall, 500 at the west, 300 at the east wall, and about 100 at the south. 400 were in reserve, along with a group of cavalry to prevent any attempt at escape. At 5 a.m. the attack began. Although caught by surprise, the Texans took up defensive positions. Cannons at the Alamo's north wall killed many on the Mexican front line, and further casualties were caused by Texan rifles. The attack on the west wall was also being opposed by Texan cannon fire. Suffering heavy losses, the Mexicans at the north and west began to fall back. Artillery placed in the chapel stalled the attack at the east, and to avoid further losses, their formation began to swerve to the right. Unable to break down the defence at the south wall, the majority of Mexicans changed course to target the southwest corner. The retreating soldiers were pushed forward again, and as they advanced to the north wall, they were joined by the attacking columns of the east and the west, both having to swing round to avoid taking further losses. All 3 columns took cover at the base of the north wall, out of reach of the Texan cannons. They were joined by some of the reserve column sent in by Santa Anna. With the majority of Mexicans in one location, many Texans posted at the south left their position to reinforce the north. But with overwhelming numbers, the Mexicans were able to scale the wall. Some defenders were killed and others fell back to the main plaza as soldiers streamed over the wall. With limited resistance at the south and many Mexicans out of reach of the Texan cannon, a renewed attack was able to force its way into the Alamo. With the north and south breached, the west wall was attacked once more, and against minimal opposition, the Mexicans gained access from a third location. An opening in the north wall was unlocked, and Mexican soldiers flooded into the Alamo. Texans that tried to escape were killed by the waiting Mexican cavalry. The remaining Texans retreated to rooms along the walls, firing from doors and windows. Soldiers began clearing each room until they reached the chapel, where the last of the Texans remained. As the Mexicans stormed the building, they were blasted by cannon fire. but completely outnumbered, the final Alamo defenders were all killed. At the end of the battle, the Mexicans had suffered losses of around 500, but the Texans had lost all 189 men. This was a victory for the Mexicans. This setback did not stop the Texans. More volunteers joined the movement and, inspired with the phrase "Remember the Alamo," continued their quest for an independent Texas.